It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate you all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Well, folks, we have a great lineup of questions here for Herd Mentality today. Some of y'all just got straight to the point, and I really appreciate that. Putting me on the spot, so we're going to dig into that. Plenty of questions about Sean McDermott, the direction of the offense, Von Miller, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Spencer Brown, all kinds of great stuff to get into today. But I want to start with Gooddeal, who, like I mentioned, gets straight to it. He said, if you were Terry Pegula, what would you do for the future of this team? And that provoked a lot of thought in my head. Not that I haven't been thinking about this, but I really kind of put down on paper my thoughts. And so I have 4 things that I would do and 3 things that I wouldn't do. Let's start with what I would do. Number 1 is I'd let the season play out. I would let the season play out. I want to see what this team can do over the last 5 games. It's an uphill battle, but they're 6-6. And the Bills can beat anybody. They can beat any team, especially with how Josh Allen has played over the last 2 games with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. Like, that dude can go on a tear, and I'm interested in seeing if it happens. Now, obviously, other factors will have to be good for him to do this, right? Special teams blunders, the defense, situational management, all of that's going to have to be complimenting to Josh Allen, but Josh Allen can carry this team. And so I want to let this season play out. And then from there, I'll start to make some decisions. And let's say that it doesn't play out in a way that inspires me, right? And I have questions about Sean McDermott and if I want him to continue as my head coach. Well, I'm also going to talk to players. So step 2 is I'm talking to players. I want to hear from Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs and Dion Dawkins and Mitch Morse and Matt Milano and Taron Johnson and Ed Oliver. I want to talk to these players and really vet out everything and see what they say about the direction of the team and the coaching staff and their belief. Because part of my thought process with this entire Sean McDermott situation is I'm a little tired of the messaging. I hear about fundamentals. I hear about discipline. I hear about how they practice all these different things, but when it comes time for those things to happen in games, they just don't go well. And that's become stale to me. What is that like for players who are putting their heart and soul into this thing and not getting the result that they want? How do they feel? I would certainly vet that out very thoroughly. And then number 3 is I would allow that information to make the decision. How does the season play out? What do my players say? And use all of the data that I collect to make a decision on the head coach. And then number 4 is I make sure Joe Brady is part of this coaching staff, including potentially as the next head coach. But whatever I do, Joe Brady is going to continue with Josh Allen. I'm going to make sure of it. Now, what I wouldn't do, and I think this is just as important as the things that I would do, number 1 is that I would not allow the fear of the unknown to impact things. There's a lot of thoughts out there that, well, you can do worse. McDermott has taken this franchise from the dumps to a contender, and I'm not interested in failing at this next hire, and therefore I'm going to stick with Sean McDermott. I just can't do that. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. And right now, this team, we've been on a conversation about it getting over the hump. As I've said this week on the podcast, rolling back down the hill the wrong way. So yeah, I'm not afraid of the unknown. I'm afraid of not ever getting over the hump. That's what I'm afraid of. And a big reason why is my head coach. So that's number one. I'm not allowing the fear of the unknown to impact my decision. Number two, I'm also not going to think about the drought. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, you saw what they did during the drought and all the failed head coaching hires and how much of a disaster that was. That's not the same. One of the biggest problems with the drought was that you never identified a franchise quarterback. Well, that step one, the biggest thing you can do is find the franchise quarterback. The Bills have that. So, yeah, the drought's irrelevant. I'm appreciative of Sean McDermott and what he's done to get us out of the drought. But I'm not going to sit here and say, well, you missed the playoffs for the 17 years prior to Sean McDermott getting there, and just assume that you're going to go right back to that. And then number three, another thing that I'm not going to do is I'm not going to fire Brandon Beane. And Brandon Beane has his misses like any GM, but that dude has delivered a championship caliber roster really for the last 4 or 5 years. And I think if you let them both go, then it gets real dicey because now you get a completely new regime and the turnover is going to be crazy. And I think that sets you back. So that's where I'm at with all of that. Kevin says, I know I'm getting ahead of things, but if the Bills did elect to move on from Sean McDermott at the end of the season, what type of head coach do you think we need? And who would be some good candidates? Now, folks, let me tell you this. We're not going to talk about Sean McDermott this entire episode. So we'll get through the Sean McDermott piece now, and then we'll talk about a lot of other things. First of all, on this entire conversation, right, the first question was what I would do. This question is more a little bit predictive in some ways. I don't think the Bills are going to fire Sean McDermott, and I reserve the right to be wrong about that. But I just don't think they're going to. I think that he's built up enough grace in the eyes of the Pegulas to let him continue. Oh, by the way, he just signed a contract extension. And I know that that's not the end-all, be-all. You see plenty of teams fire coaches that are either recently hired with plenty of years left or guys after they sign extensions. This happens all the time. So that's not a big concern for me. I mean, Pegulas have money. That's not going to be a big deal. But it is that a little bit into what's going on with the Sabres, the business side of the Bills, right? It feels like that whole business side executive thing, there's just a lot of turnover and weird stuff going on there. You're building a new stadium where you're responsible for the overages. I mean, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in overages. Kim Pegula's health, which we're not fully up to date on. And so when you layer all that together, I just don't think they're going to be overly eager to go on a coaching search to replace Sean McDermott, who has the highest win percentage in the history of the franchise. So predictably, I just don't know if this is going to happen. Now, if they bottom out the rest of the way and the players go to ownership and say, we can't do this anymore, yeah, that's going to force their hand. But I'm not sitting here right now thinking that this is something I expect to happen. As for the qualities that I'd be looking for, I want an offensive-minded head coach. And I'd be looking hard at Joe Brady, who's had NFL head coaching interviews already, who has been regarded as one of the up-and-coming offensive minds in football, who knows your quarterback, who, my goodness, have I absolutely enjoyed the last 2 games and studying what that offense looks like. And the other name that is really interesting to me is Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Lions. Now, there's questions there. Run-heavy guy. What does Dan Campbell's influence look like on that offense, right? He kind of pulled out of some coaching opportunities last year. What's his appetite? But those are 2 guys that seem interesting to me, and Joe Brady might be my personal favorite leading candidate, if I'm being completely honest with you. All right, I got plenty more to get to here, so stick with us. But look, I got to tell you about DoorDash. I am obsessed with DoorDash. The convenience is simply unmatched, especially in my busy life. We're all busy, right? We're all looking for extra time, and we're having a hard time finding time to go to the grocery store or make dinner or, even find something to snack on. Well, DoorDash can handle that for you. They'll bring you groceries right to your front door. They'll bring you something from the gas station. If you want a Gatorade and a candy bar, they'll bring that to your front door. And they'll also bring you food from your favorite local restaurants. I order all the time. In fact, yesterday, my favorite barbecue place, Smoke Pit, was open, and I was able to get wings and sausage, and it was absolutely delicious. So stop worrying about what's for dinner. Stop worrying about what you're going to snack on. Stop worrying about when you're going to find time to go to the grocery store. Let DoorDash handle that for you. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. You download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Again, don't forget to use code LOCKED23 for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change, terms apply. Folks, you got to check out PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the funnest, most exciting, easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. The format is incredible. It's just you against the numbers. It's not you against thousands of other players, including pros, including sharks. It's just you against numbers. All you do is select two or more players. You pick more or less in their projected stats, and you place your entry. That's it. It doesn't take long. Picks can be made in under a minute, and then when you win, the withdrawals are super, super quick. I love all these sports on TV right now. I love them even more when I have a PrizePicks entry going into a slate of games because it just makes it that much more exciting. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. The next one today comes from Rob, who says, is it time to start thinking about rebuilding the offense with more athletic talent around Josh Allen? I'll say this. There are some areas personnel-wise where I want to see some different things offensively around Josh Allen. But I'd also say this might be his best supporting cast offensively that he's had yet in his career. And there's a lot that I love. Stefon Diggs. I love Dalton Kincaid. Khalil Shakir. There's a lot to like about James Cook. The offensive line has played really well in year 2 under Aaron Kromer. Got some young pieces there that are intriguing, a couple of veterans as well. So there's some good things here. But the two spots where I say, yeah, you know what? I would definitely be focused on this in the offseason is, first of all, wide receiver depth and running back depth. Wide receiver, I think you have a couple of nice pieces in Diggs and Shakir. But I think you need some more. I am not going to be clamoring for Gabe Davis to be extended. You can cut Deontay Hardy now, and that wouldn't affect me at all. Trent Sherfield as well as a player that I think can walk in free agency. So I think you're going to have 3 new rostered receivers, I think you should have 3 new rostered receivers around Josh Allen. Maybe Justin Shorter can develop and be something for you next year. I'm not sure. But I'm going to be very interested in a more complete skill set as my number 2 that I hope can develop into a number 1. And so I'm hopeful that the Bills will invest an early draft pick in a wide receiver that is a dynamic route runner that can separate, that can win after the catch, and has the speed to win vertically. I think this is a receiver core that doesn't have a true, hold your breath because the ball's in their hands type players, whether that's down the field or just creating after the catch. And I think that will help with some of the explosives. And I think the Bills should be very, top priority this offseason is finding one of those weapons. And then obviously you need to complement that with some more depth as well at wide receiver, probably some veterans that you would want to kind of add to the mix as well. At running back, James Cook, I like a lot there. I think his urgency earlier in games sometimes annoys me a lot. But there's a lot to like there. I would want to get him a nice complimentary back. Latavius Murray, thanks for everything this year. You're a 1-year deal. Damian Harris, same type of deal. Would love for Ty Johnson to be back as the 3, but I would be interested in having a younger version of Latavius Murray as the number 2, if that makes sense. So that's where I'd be thinking. Give me a legit number 2 wide receiver that has a skill set that I think complements this offense well, that has speed, a couple of veterans for depth, and then that running back 2 spot. That's really where I would focus my efforts, as well as you're going to have to look at offensive line depth and those types of things. But those are kind of the leading factors in what I'm thinking about for this offense in the offseason. Aiden says, I know Spencer Brown has had quite the bounce back season this year, easily his best season of his career thus far. So because of that, do you personally view him as our franchise right tackle moving forward? Or are you still not quite there? Honestly, I don't know which way to go on this. Would love to hear your thoughts. So Spencer Brown's been a big topic on this podcast. And I guess I was right about just allowing him to have this season and seeing how he developed and, being mindful of his path to this point and the athletic ability, the size, all of that's really, really exciting. And he's certainly playing his best football. And I think he's this year told us that he's a sufficient starting right tackle. However, I am not eager to do a contract extension here. I just like with Gabe Davis, I think this is a player that you let his rookie contract play out. So his contract is up after 2024, and I'm going to let 2024 play out to see what type of consistency I get in back-to-back years and if he stays on that trajectory. So that's where I'm at with it. I think every indication is that he should be your starting right tackle in 2024, and how he performs there will tell me what I do about a contract extension. So that's where I'm at with Spencer Brown. Really, really satisfied with that development. Anders says, what is Von Miller's issue? Is it mental or physical? Seems like he isn't able to process the game at the same level as before, but you would assume it's like riding a bike and that once his recovery was complete, he could resume where he left off, but obviously that isn't the case. I have been as critical as anybody as it relates to Von Miller and the impact that he's had on this team. I even said, at least in our subtext community, that I think Von Miller should have been inactive for the Eagles game. I thought it was a bad matchup for him, and I think you would give him a chance to have like 2 weeks before the next game against Kansas City to further remove himself from the injury and kind of work some stuff out and just try again after the bye. So, let me start everything that I'm about to say. I want to preface by acknowledging that. But I think this is all circumstantial for Von Miller. He tore his ACL at 33 years old, and he's rehabbing to come back, as he finishes age 33 and turned 34 in March. He has to find himself, right? Movement-wise, technique-wise, getting the timing down of his pass rush repertoire, finding that bend and finesse ability that he has become a Hall of Fame caliber player with. And that's hard to do on the fly, right? It's not like he had a normal offseason where he's working on football. He's working on strengthening his knee so he can play football. And so he's just not calloused up, right? I mean, he didn't have any training camp or preseason to work on his game. And so he's trying to do this like in the middle of the season. And that's hard to do, especially at his age. And the product has been poor. Like, Von Miller is not a positive asset to this football team. He's a liability to me when he's out on the field. I keep saying, my brother will tell you, he watches the games with me. I say, when Von Miller's on the field, you're playing defense with 10 guys. He just can't help you. My questions about this whole thing is the return, right? And let's go back to it, because a lot of y'all wanted Von Miller week 1 and all of that type of stuff, right? And so I say that because I question the return. He came back in week 5. They activated his 21-day window, and he immediately played. And because of everything that I just said, with the ramp up and everything that goes into getting him ready to play a season, and just all that goes into it, I think you were irresponsible with bringing him back, because you should have been able to understand through seeing him in practice that he's not ready to make an impact. And so don't activate him from the pup. And certainly when you open up that 21-day window, give it a little bit more time to play out. I know everyone was anxious to get Von Miller back, but clearly he wasn't fully ready to just pick up where he left off or even come close to it. So I think you layer all that together and you can understand where we're at. Hopefully Von Miller, as he has a full offseason coming up, And when we get to 2024, he can be somewhat close to what he was before his injury. But this is all circumstantial. Like, I want to be mad at Von Miller. I do. Tore his ACL at 33 years old. I mean, how many guys are even playing at 33, 34 years old, let alone playing and coming back off of a major knee injury? It's circumstantial. It's disappointing, but it's circumstantial. People ask me, like, Joe, why wasn't he a dud in the latest All-22 review? My expectations after watching Von Miller since week 5 are 0. I don't expect him to do a thing out there. And there's a problem with that, but I question a lot more the process and how we got here than Von Miller not doing everything that he can to try to make an impact for this football team. All right, we got even more to get to here in just a second. We're going to get to Taron Johnson and Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, all kinds of stuff. But look, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to make sure that you have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The next one today comes from David, who says, this game sealed for me the Poyer Hyde era in Buffalo. Neither have been impact guys this year, and last night stuck out multiple times as net negatives. With the limited resources the Bills have cap-wise and other pressing needs that could be addressed, what would be your plan at safety next year for the Bills? Well, I'll first of all agree that impact has not been a high-impact season for either player. You know, they're not out there making the plays that we enjoyed them making for so many years in Buffalo. But I'll also caution people to not go too hard here because they're not slugs out there. They're really not. And I think they both have had their moments. I think Jordan Poyer has played better and better throughout the course of the season. And Micah Hyde, I mean, certainly being a victim of the moment, he gave up a couple of touchdowns against the Eagles, but he's not been a slug out there for, a good part of the season. I think they're at least starting caliber players. Are they impact starters? No, I don't think they're that, but they're at least sufficient starters. Now, with that said, I am not going to be afraid of a reset here. I have been, candidly, I have been afraid of a reset at safety. I'm not anymore because they're not impact players anymore. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be afraid to reset there. And I'm not going to be afraid to reset a lot of things on this roster. And we'll get to those offseason discussions when the time's appropriate. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lose sleep about re-signing Micah Hyde. If you feel like moving on from Jordan Poyer and getting out of his deal is the best move, which can create some cap space, I'd be for that as well. But they're not slugs out there. They're at least sufficient starting players. They're just not making the impact that we have enjoyed throughout the years. This next question kind of ties into that. It comes from Papa T, who says, does Taron Johnson profile as a potential Poyer replacement? You love having a stud nickel, but at least this way, Johnson would never have to leave the field. I think it's a possibility. Like, that's not something I've considered, but if you really wanted him to play safety, I think Taron Johnson could do it. At the same time, he's one of the best slot corners in the league, so I'm not necessarily eager to move him here. This is a little bit to me like the Matt Milano stuff, where you have an elite outside linebacker. Well, if you move him to Mike linebacker, he's probably not as effective. It's the same thing with Taron Johnson. He's an elite slot corner. You move him to safety, he's probably not going to be an elite safety. So kind of just keep him where he's at. But I think the Bills do have options here. Like maybe Christian Benford's in this conversation. Maybe Rasul Douglas. Maybe you look at your corner situation next year. You have Benford. You have Kyer Elam. Remember that guy? He's still around. You've got Trey White coming back. Potential other investments. Maybe you bring back Dane Jackson. And you think to yourself, well, is Rasul Douglas a safety candidate? Is Dane Jackson a safety candidate? Benford, right? There's a lot of possibilities in addition to other outside options, draft picks, free agents. Taylor Rapp, do you like him? I kind of don't. DeMar Hamlin, right? I'm just saying there's options here. And so whatever it is, I'm not going to be afraid of a reset at the safety position. Patrick says, do NFL teams use situational assistance, a position that reviews in-game situations and tells the head coach when he's being too conservative? McDermott needs someone who can come over the top of the game in radio chatter and point to some scenarios that he might be missing. Yes, the Bills specifically have a coach that is, his title is game management coach, and his name is Mark Lubbock. He's been on staff since 2017, and his title is game management coach. And this is something the Bills have, and something that I'm seeing more and more popular across the NFL, that there's game management coaches out there. And so one thing that I'm not willing to do, folks, is I'm not willing to give Sean McDermott any type of grace because he's also the defensive coordinator. I'm just not, because the issues that we're seeing right now predate him as the defensive coordinator. They do. This stuff is not just the 2023 Bills stuff. So is he stretched too thin? Yeah, maybe he is, but I don't give him any grace whatsoever for that. There's plenty of other head coaches, more than half of the NFL, their head coach also calls plays. Yeah, he's got a game management coach, but ultimately these are his decisions, and I give him zero grace for being the head coach and defensive play caller. Kate says, would you be able to talk about timeout strategy at the end of half/game? The timeout before the Eagles kick felt wrong watching it, and you mentioned your disagreement with it in the Monday podcast. Can you spend some time discussing when and how timeouts are used as strategy at the end of a game? So, yeah, let's do this. First of all, let's talk about those timeouts and then some of the other contributing factors here. So for the Bills in that situation at the end of the game, they actually called 2 timeouts. So the first timeout was before the 3rd and 17 play. And the reason they did that is, and Sean McDermott told us this, is they wanted to set the defense. They wanted to take a timeout and talk about all the possibilities and make sure that the defense was set. And I guess that worked out because they threw an incomplete pass, and it was a 59-yard field goal, and we know that they made it. But obviously, the Eagles wanted to get closer than 59 yards. And so you have a strategy session, you call a timeout, and you talk about it. Wind up working out. The second timeout was used to ice the kicker. And so you let him get out there, and you call a timeout, and you let the kicker go think about the kick even more in hopes that it plays with his mind and he misses. Now, that is proven to be very ineffective in the NFL, but it's not uncommon. That's a normal thing that you see happen. Coaches will try to ice the kicker with a timeout. I'm not in favor of it. I think you keep them in the heat of the moment and see what they do. So that's specifically those timeouts and why they were called. But there's a number of reasons why you would call a timeout at an end of half, end of game situation. First of all, if you're on offense and you need to stop the clock to give yourself the time necessary to get in scoring range, right? That's a big way. And you could do it also on defense. Let's say that you feel like they're going to at least get a field goal, or they're going to get the necessary points to tie or take the lead. You may want to call timeouts defensively to preserve time for your offense to get back on the field. So you want to stop the clock, but that goes both ways, offensively and defensively. You could call a timeout because you need to talk strategy, right? It's a critical play. You feel like you're in good position for timeouts, and let's say it's a 4th and 4, and if you don't convert, the game's over. And that play's more important than keeping your timeout. So you want to talk strategy. So strategy in critical moments both ways. You can do it on defense, where it's a high leverage play in the game, and you want to call a timeout just to make sure that your defense is set. That's another reason why. And then other times you could just call one defensively because you're reeling and you want to kind of have a break and have a take a little pause. Maybe you're leading or something like that, and you feel like time's not really an issue, and that if you call a timeout, it's not really going to impact the drive, but you want to give your players just a little second to reset and come to the sideline. You can do that as well. So that would be some of the reasons. Matthew says, I know everyone under the sun is crapping on McDermott right now. No doubt his critical game time decisions are poor, but he has done what few coaches can do, which is coach up players. He is elite at getting the most out of his players. For that alone, he should remain as the Bills head coach. He has to get an assistant coach that will help with his decision-making. Can you name any instances in which a head coach has relied on an assistant coach to make game time decisions or at least help with them? I just talked about it. So the Bills have a game management coach. His name is Mark Lubbock. Been there since 2017. But where I want to go with this question from Matthew is this. There are many functions of a head coach. Game management, player development, culture, game planning, adjustments, team administration, right? They don't just do one thing, right? They don't just coach what happens in a 60-minute football game. There are many, many functions of a head coach. And Matthew, I think there'd probably be some people that would agree with you that Sean McDermott is very good at player development. I think he's above average there. I don't know that he's elite at it like you would say. But just like a player, right? They have skill sets. There's things that they do well. There's things that they don't do well. And you have to ask yourself questions as an organization. What's most important to you? How do you support and complement the head coach in areas that they're weak? Because nobody's great at all that stuff, right? Game management, player development, culture, game planning, adjustments, team administration. And I think what's important to you as an organization is different at different times. Different parts of your life cycle. There are times where you need a guy that's great at culture. You need times where you need a great team administrator. You need a great strategy guy, right? And so when the Bills hired Sean McDermott, they needed a culture guy. And mission accomplished. You did that. But where he's been lacking is game management. So now the culture's there, the talent's there. What's holding you back? Game management. Now, you don't want to regress in certain areas to ascend in others, but like the point being is that there's many functions of a head coach, and they're not always good at everything. I'd say very few of them are very good at everything. And so what's important to you at that current point in time for the life cycle of your team? I think that's what you have to ask yourself. And that's what I think the Bills need to ask themselves as well. Are Sean McDermott's shortcomings too much for this team where they are in their life cycle to get them over the hump? So there you have it. Herd mentality in the books. Awesome slate of questions, folks. Really, really appreciate the participation on this. The rest of the week, we're going to start doing some bye week stuff. Self-scouting, third quarter report card, talking about the trends of the team. So a lot of analysis coming your way. I've really enjoyed doing that. And then, of course, next week, we'll get into Chiefs prep and some other things that I have up my sleeve. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.